Welcome back to the AMTD Digital VidCast. We've got Tim Kobe here. We're on the second episode. It's an absolute cracker. Let's just jump straight back into it. I want to get into a bit about this, this design thinking process that has worked so successfully for the work that the work that you've done, versus a lean startup approach, which is very much about launch early, fail fast, try again. Are they mutually exclusive or do they coexist? How do you bring the two methodologies together in harmony?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I know that Google and other companies, particularly in the startup sector, have used that sort of fail fast approach. But from the standpoint of our perspective, I guess is why fail at all? I think there's a lot of learning that happens, and learning is fine. You may get a successful company out of that, but if failing fast is the approach, it really means that there's a lot of education going on. That is one way to do it. I think a lot of what the approach to using strategic design as a tool tends to point to is what are the things that you can do that will ensure as much success as possible. And I think it comes with some experience. It comes with being able to take some risk, recognize that there can be some things that won't be successful the first time, and keep moving. So, in a way, there is a little bit of that fail fast component to it. I guess when I look back at the amount of things that we would try, they were always informed by a certain degree of understanding, of around what we were creating. I think, when we finished the first year of the Apple retail program, things were going well, products were selling. We had put 20 stores in the market, and we went back into the Tuesday meeting with Steve, and he said, "Okay, now we're going to start designing the second generation of stores." And everyone sort of looked at each other like, why? In retail, you normally refresh every 5 years, right? And so we're starting the next generation. And he said, what's happening is everybody is looking at what we're doing, and because we're seeing some success, everyone's going to start emulating that. So now I want to do the next generation. And his strategy was to get ahead, stay ahead. In 2002, in the dot-com crisis, he reinvested in technology that led ultimately to launching the iPhone in 2007. In 2008, during the financial crisis, rather than lay off people, he doubled down on research and development. So when every time someone would pull back, he would push forward, and he was looking to get ahead of his competitors by doing that. And I think it was it's a very bold, very confident thing to do. But he recognized if he did it successfully that the competitive advantage would be enormous, and it's turned out to be.
Yeah, and that's clearly a common attribute of a lot of great leaders and design thinkers, many of which you've worked with. The work you've done in Xiaomi, for example, on the surface, some might say, well, there are a lot of companies aspire to be like Apple. Some even try to emulate them. But then there are those who, really succeed in their own right. Tell us a bit about Xiaomi and how is Xiaomi different? What are they doing?
Well, I think initially they looked at Apple a lot, and it was because they were a brand new company, a new startup. They were seeing access to the China market as being a very successful place for Apple, and they felt that they were missing some local market share. So initially, there was a lot of emulation, I would say, of, if not the design, certainly the objectives, the product mix, a lot of looking at Apple. But as Xiaomi progressed, they really sort of changed their structure. And if you look at Apple today, I think that if you do a heat map of all the people who are carrying iPhones, and you look at where they live, they tend to live in affluent areas of the world. and they tend to charge the most for their products, and they're not really a low-end provider, right? They're selling what is considered by Western standards a premium product. Xiaomi, on the other hand, wanted to invert the pyramid, which is to say that the best designed products should be accessible to the most people. And so that model was one that was going to definitely impact their market share, their profit, but the strategy was to allow it to be scalable to as many people as possible. And certainly in China, with the population, that approach, that strategy is one that is getting the hardware, if you will, in the hands of the people, and then being able to benefit and leverage the software and the services side of the business, which is pretty much where everybody is going. So that approach was, I would say, a different one than what Apple did. Apple also worked really hard to limit the SKU counts, the number of products that they would produce, where Xiaomi, I think today probably produces 2,000 products. And they want to expand everything that they can in terms of being a part of a lifestyle that people would have into their product mix. And so that's also that's very much the inverse of what Steve wanted to do. He wanted to keep a very narrow, focused product assortment, and Xiaomi wanted to actually encourage others to produce things under the Xiaomi brand and take as much of the mind share that people had relative to technology and own that. So I think they've evolved over time in a bit different directions. I think Xiaomi's market share is probably what is it now? About $500 billion. I think Apple's $2 trillion. So they're not doing too bad, certainly, either one of them. But it is a different way to get to their market share.
Speaking of different ways to get to market share, it's to turn their attention to the financial services space. There's a lot of really interested people who are tuning in today to understand a bit about these ideas. Traditional banks have been grappling with design for a while. I know you've worked with a bunch of them, including Citibank. You've also worked with the FinTech community. I'm curious to understand, in terms of their manner of approaching design, how does it differ? And what do you think is the competitive advantages that you see that fintechs have in also making a similar sort of dent in the banking world as Apple did in consumer electronics and mobile technology?
Well, as I think most people would agree, the financial sector is probably one of the most conservative sectors out there in terms of change. I think fintech has actually driven the majority of change that the banks have actually adopted, and whether that's moving into more customer-centric experiences or different types of services. I would say that without the fintech push, banks probably would look a lot like they always did. But I would say that particularly if we look at 2020, 2021, the adoption curve, most of the people who were the early adopters and certainly the innovators, the front part of that curve, most of them had already moved into financial services with the expectations that it should be just as easy to use, just as seamless as other sectors. But in the last 2 years, certainly we've seen a large number. I think in one of your previous podcasts or lectures, they were talking about the number of people who adopted recently the technology 2020 and 2021. And that's driven primarily by COVID, but these are the laggards. These are those who only would move if they were forced to. And so, it's one of these things where I think the curve is definitely a slower one relative to the other types of applications of technology, particularly in financial services. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why the sector is, at least fintech sector, is so hot, is there's still opportunity. There's still places where the banks have sort of sat and cherry picked the things that might be a nice feature, a nice benefit, but they still are very, very conservative and difficult to move. But given that, I think that's why fintech space is a good one for investors to be looking at. Is there are going to be those who are strong disruptors. I know some payment systems and some other things that are going on that are very progressive, and they're getting traction, but not necessarily coming in through the bank door. The sector that's slow moving is a prime target for those who are looking to innovate and to have impact. So I think it's a pretty obvious target set myself.
Now you've got a bunch of fintech founders out there listening in. What would you pass on to them as some key things for them to keep in mind going forward? But also, where would you suggest that they start if they wanted to seriously take on a design thinking approach to their business?
Most people think that design, or even the design thinking process, is about the way something looks. I think that design is commonly misunderstood. And I think if you're looking at something, and this goes back to the work with Steve, he always said it is how something looks and feels, but ultimately what it is, it's about what it does for people. And if you're a fintech company, if you're in any startup sector, you need to really understand why you deserve to exist. Mm-hmm. And if you're just one of many, you put yourself into a pile of many, then you're at risk. But if you can differentiate yourself, if you can stand for values that your customers share, and you can deliver on those things, you have an exponential opportunity to be successful. And I think that's really one of the key parts, is to recognize that good design serves a purpose. It's not what something looks like. It's not the color, the shape, and any of that. That's all what you need to execute it. That's a tactic. But ultimately, the strategy, forming what it does for people, and making sure that it's something that matters to people, that has to be really where you should start. A lot of people start at the tactical level, and I think that's fundamentally a high-risk proposition.
Well, there's some incredible insights, Tim. I can't thank you enough. It's been an absolute treat. It's been a real honor, and really appreciate your openness and candor in sharing your insights. On behalf of AMTD Digital VidCast, thank you for joining, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Take care for now. Bye.
Thanks, Pierre.